walk you through the presentation at that point. My name is Andre Vink. I'm a product manager for Niagara Networks, and I want to walk you through TLS decryption and how we do that in Niagara Networks. So, starting with a little bit of background, I won't go into all the necessities or why we really need TLS decryption. Reality is that on the current internet, currently probably 90 to 95% of all the traffic is encrypted. So most important is as a customer not to lose visibility on your traffic. So really knowing what is going on into the network or in the network. So as a little bit of background, decryption is almost as old as the internet itself. In 1994, Netscape already realized that a certain kind of encryption would be very beneficial. Up to that time, decryption or encrypted traffic wasn't really going on in the network. If you create a session like a telnet session, like an HTTP session, everything was unencrypted. Everything was just plain text. So if you took a capture of the traffic, you could see what any other person on the network was doing. So in 1994, Netscape started with encryption at that time called SSL, Secure Sockets Layer, and actually the SSL 1.0 never was released. The first official release was in 1995, the SSL 2.0. Well, over time, it became apparent that TLS decryption or TLS encryption was very much a necessity. So in 1999, the IETF, the organization that creates all the rules, all the configurations, etc., they decided that TLS was something that would become a standard. Microsoft didn't really like the name SSL as it came from Netscape, and they were heavily of large competition. So in the end, IETF decided to call it TLS, Transport Layer Security, as the first official standard on encryption. Well, over the years, we got different versions, starting with TLS 1.0, TLS 1.1, TLS 1.2, which is still commonly used. And over time, also all the previous versions became deprecated. So that's basically how it started. And with that, we are currently at release TLS 1.3. And TLS 1.3 imposes a number of different or other issues. And to open that, TLS 1.3 makes it very, very hard to decrypt or being able to decrypt traffic if you are not part of the actual connection. If you're not part of the actual negotiation phase of the session. So up to TLS 1.2, there were still options to use static keys. That means that if the client negotiate and the server negotiate a session, they use a static key once negotiating the encryption methods. And if you had the static key, if you had the certificate, the private key of the server, you will always be able to decrypt the traffic. Well, that with TLS 1.3, or actually in TLS 1.2, there were already cipher suites that used ephemeral keys, which means that every couple of seconds the actual encryption method, the actual encryption key was rotating, so every time every couple of seconds you will have a new key to do the decryption. And how that decryption is done, or how that encryption is done, is changed. So once you if you're not part of that negotiation phase on how the decryption is used and which keys are used, because the keys actually are rotating as well, it became pretty much impossible of decrypting the traffic. With the introduction of TLS 1.3, all the static keys were removed. So if you're using TLS 1.3, then only the cipher suite with ephemeral keys are used. Introducing something, well, not really introducing, but making even stronger the perfect forwarding secrecy, the ability to, or making the inability, even if you record the traffic, take a copy of the traffic, and even if you afterwards would be able to get this private key, even with that private key, you are not able to decrypt a copy of the traffic. So that also means that cipher suite, removing the cipher, all the cipher suites, made TLS a very strong way of encryption, but it also made the traditional out-of-band decryption obsolete, because, well, if you're not part of the session and if you do not have the private key, you are not able to decrypt the traffic. And this is where man-in-the-middle decryption really became a necessity. What does it mean, man in the middle? If you think about the connection between the client and the server, you connect, or you step inside this connection and you try to pretend to be the server the client is talking to, and you pretend to be the client and talk to the server on behalf of the client. So if you take these two roles, you are able to decrypt the traffic, because you're mimicking the client and talking to the server. Well, that means that you're negotiating the encryption method with the server, so you can decrypt the traffic. But you also mimic to be and try to be act like the server for the client, so the client starts a connection and actually talks to you, and that's the way how you really get a copy of that decrypted traffic. So that is where man in the middle becomes very important. All that encryption is based on certificates. Certificates are issued for a specific domain or full qualified domain name, and they look like something like www.domain.com. It's a file with a lot of plain text which can be decrypted. That actually there are two versions or two ways to do that decryption. A pure certificate, service certificate, so only valid for this one server, or use a wildcard connection saying, okay, all my servers in my domain or in the subdomain can use this certificate, so it's a wildcard for all these servers. When TLS, or actually SSL, was created, it was thought about, but how do we do it? And do it if we have to encrypt everything, that means that we have to create new protocols to encrypt the traffic, and so that means that we need to have a new protocol for the web server, we need to have a new protocol for the email server, we need to have a new protocol for our telnet server, etc., etc. So that where they came up with is actually, if you look at the OC layer, there's the 7 layers, and what was done is we put a small decryption layer actually in between the transport and the application layer. Actually, basically making the TLS not an official layer, but it's part of, well, maybe part of the transport, maybe a part of the application. It depends how you look at it. Usually it's thought of as being part of the transport layer, hence the name transport security layer. And that's really doing the encryption. That means that there was no change in protocol stack required. The protocol stacks on both on the server and the client could remain the same, just add that small layer in between where if the protocol was, the connection was established, we just encrypt it. It also means that it's universally deployable for all protocols. If you can do it for the one, you can do it for the others as well. It sits in between the layers. If you look at the session, then the client always starts the conversation and starts the encryption conversation. So it connects to the server and says, okay, before we talk any further, I want to negotiate an encryption with you so we can communicate safely. And then in this encryption phase, the server and the client negotiate not only the key, but also the way how to decrypt, which cipher to join or which cipher to use. And there is an exchange where the client says, okay, this is the strongest encryption I can do. Then the server says, okay, this is my strongest encryption I can do. And the service, then the server decides saying, okay, this is the highest version. Let's use the highest version of the two of us. So that's what it's going to be. So this is how encryption actually works. Because of this ephemeral key usage, this rotating keys, the decryption engine sits between the client and the server, as you can see in the drawing. In this case, I wrote the packet, drawn the packet broker in between. The packet broker has a decryption engine, and the decryption engine is talking to the client and the server. So it connects to the server on behalf of the client, as I mentioned before, and it pretends to be a server, and thereby fooling the client and let the client think that he actually talks to the server, which isn't true. It's connecting to the packet broker or to the SSL engine. So what happens is that if you have the server and you own the server, you also usually own the certificate that is used to encrypt the traffic. And we take a copy of that certificate and store that on the SSL engine of the packet broker. So that certificate is loaded onto the packet broker's decryption engine, and we can store multiple of these certificates. And once a connection is set up, we look at the certificate to use and establish a connection with the client, pretending to be the server, etc., etc. And the packet broker will forward the received traffic to the encryption engine. The traffic is matched, it will be decrypted, and a copy of the traffic is available for inspection or otherwise. Again, the private key is required to impersonate the server and to start decrypting the traffic, and is used to establish the session with the client, and the packet broker, the encryption engine, acts as a regular client, so only talking to the server. It doesn't need a private key for that. It only uses the public part of the key, the public key, which is freely available, so we don't have to do anything on that side. But to act as the server, we need to have this this private key. And that's important to understand, because if you want to decrypt traffic coming from the internet, let's say from Facebook, etc., etc., if you really want to be completely transparent for your Facebook connection, that would mean that you would need to have the service certificate of the Facebook server. Well, that's something that is, you'll never get that. And decrypting that traffic becomes very hard if you really want to do that completely transparent. There are ways around it, but it also has some drawbacks. If you want to discuss that any further, then we can have a chat afterwards, or make an appointment with us, and we will talk you through that and explain what can be done. In general, there are three decryption methods, or deployment methods. The first is the one that was used for many years and is still available, can be used for anything up to the static cipher suites of TLS 1.2. So that's anything from SSL 1.0 or 2.0, the first release, up to the static keys of TLS 1.2, and it's called passive out of band. What we do is we take a copy of the traffic between the client and the server, and we send that copy of the traffic through the SSL engine. SSL engine tries to decrypt the traffic and send it to a reporting or inspection appliance. So taking a copy of the traffic, not being in line with the traffic, we just take a copy of. Obviously, there is no performance penalty or whatever, because we just use the passive tap to tap the traffic. For any of the other encryption schemes, so the ephemeral keys in TLS 1.2 or full TLS 1.3, we need to use a man-in-the-middle technique. And that's where we have the second one. Is called active out of band or passive inline. And that's the middle one. And in these two, you already see that there are actually two encryption engines, or two parts of the encryption engine. One on the server side and one of the client side. And so in this case, as I mentioned, we do set up a session to the client, we do set up a session to the server. In between, the in-between part is not encrypted, and we can take a copy of that traffic and send it to any inspection or reporting tool. Important to know is that we only create a copy of that traffic. So once we receive a request from the client, we immediately we decrypt that traffic, immediately re-encrypt that traffic again, and start the session with the server, and only take a copy of that decrypted traffic and send it out. So there's nothing in between. So we take a copy. So that means that the engine is available to create copies of the traffic for reporting and inspection tools that are out of band. Hence the reason called active out of band. We are active in the session. We do have an active session in between, but the traffic that comes out of this encryption engine is similar to being a passive connection, just a copy of the traffic. The third one, and that is often called or thought of as the man in the middle, while the active out of band or passive inline is typically a man in the middle deployment as well, is where we can place an inspection tool, let's say a web application firewall or an intrusion prevention system, in line with the decrypted traffic. So in this case, the inspection tool sits in line with the traffic. So we take a copy of the traffic and send that to the inspection tool. And once the inspection tool returns the traffic to the packet broker, to the decryption engine, we send that traffic to the server. So there's an actual configuration, an actual appliance in line with the traffic. Important for both of these deployments that we support all cipher suites on that. So all TLS 1.3, all the ephemeral keys in TLS 1.2 are supported. And important to mention is that it can be used as a decryption offload. So instead of having, maybe you have a web application firewall as well as an intrusion prevention system, and very often these appliances do have a decryption engine as well, but it means that traffic is going to this web application firewall, it's doing its decryption stuff, do the inspection, encrypt it again, and send it out to the next engine. By using a decryption offload, we can do the decryption and the encryption once, doing on the packet broker, and all security appliance in between do not have to do any encryption or decryption anymore, because it's offloaded to the packetron, offloaded to the packet broker, and only after the traffic has left the last appliance, the final appliance in line, we re-encrypt the traffic again and send it out to the client or the server. So these are the three different deployment methods of decryption that we offer, and which are usually available in the market. And as an example, I have 3 case studies. The first one is protection of web-based applications. This is what I mentioned in my previous or at the previous slides already. This is what we've done with a major shipyard in Europe. It's building commercial and military vessels. And what we did here is actually a deployment of both TLS decryption as well as a web application firewall that is running on the packet broker itself. As you may know, the Packetron, our encryption engine or our processing engine, can run virtual appliances as well. We are open to run any virtual appliance on the packet broker. So in this case, we used an F5 web application firewall and run that as a soft machine on the packet broker. So there are actually 2 Packetrons, 2 packet processing engines inside the packet broker, one running the web application firewall. That's a virtualization engine. It's running VMware, so we can run multiple applications on the Packetron, and one for TLS decryption, which is a dedicated deployment on the Packetron. So what we've done here is decrypting the ephemeral keys, so the stronger encryption methods of TLS from TLS 1.2 and obviously TLS 1.3. And what it was important to be able to, the ability to forward the decryption traffic to an inline inspection engine, but also the customer preferred to have a single platform solution. So they looked at the encryption engine that was offered with F5, but they needed to have a hardware appliance which was quite expensive for what they were looking for, and they wanted to have some copy of the traffic maybe for in a later stage. So in the end, this customer thought about, hey, listen, maybe we can do a packet broker and having the same functionality. So that's where they came with to us to talk about the abilities to do such an implementation, which we did. So we created a highly integrated TLS decryption engine, and using the technology partners, in this case F5 web application firewall inspection engine on the packet broker, to do both of the security functions as an integrated part of the packet broker. Secondly, and this is a completely different deployment. It's decryption of unified communication and from a VoIP provider. So basically, it's a mobile provider in Africa with a wide range of services offering to the customer. And what they have is they offer VoIP services to the customer, but with the stronger encryption methods that were used on the signaling plane. So if you have a VoIP session, there is the actual voice communication, which is often UDP. It can be connected or encrypted. It often is encrypted, but it can also be non-encrypted. Usually a VoIP provider is not interested in the voice connection at all. What they're looking for is the signaling connection, which can be used also used to measure the quality of the connection. And this is where we did the deployment. What we did is the customer has a session border controller, so the customer is connecting its voice connection, is establishing the connection with the session border controller, and the session border controller connects over the internet to the actual VoIP server, which in this case was a Microsoft deployment. What we did is before sending that session to the session border controller, that session was sent to the packet broker. The packet broker decrypted the signaling connection, created a copy of the traffic to of this signaling connection, and sent it to a monitoring probe for inspection purposes and quality of experience measuring. Re-encrypt the traffic and send that session to the session border controller, being completely transparent for the client, so the client still thinks it's connecting directly to the session border controller, but we created a copy of that traffic, send that to the monitoring probe, and using a Microsoft API, the customer is able to interface with the Microsoft deployment, the Microsoft server, taking information from that as well, and get a full visibility and insight on the quality of these specific voice calls. So, decrypting the signaling information between in this case, Oracle session border controller and the clients. Support for both static keys as used in TLS 1.1, but also the ephemeral keys as used in TLS 1.2 and 1.3. So a man in the middle active proxy, being a man in the middle active proxy for all of these sessions, providing a full insight in the traffic, the sessions and traffic of the specific client sessions, while not touching the voice at all. So the voice was completely ignored in this session. The customer is not interested in any of this information. So that's very important. Last but not least, application security for financial institution, yet a completely different deployment. And actually, this is a national bank. And this bank, as probably all banks, they run a wealth of applications, and all these applications are communicating with each other based on API calls. So if you need information from a financial system, or need to put information into a financial system, you use an API call with arguments the information that you want to send to this application. Well, then obviously, if you use these calls, these API calls, it makes it all the application vulnerable to attacks from the outside. In theory, it is quite easy to add information that into that application by using these APIs? Well, there are different vendors that are able to inspect these API calls and to make sure that all calls are valid, etc., etc. But you have to be in line. And you have to send that API call through this application. But if this API call is using HTTPS to communicate with the application, you don't see anything because the connection is encrypted. And this is where we did a deployment together with Layer 7 Defense. Layer 7 Defense is an Israeli company that is able to inspect the API calls and look at the validity, etc., etc. And we combined that with our SSL decryption engine and run this as a combined application on the packet broker again. So what the application was running on one packetron and the TLS decryption on another packetron. And by doing so, have one single application, one single deployment, but also assuring that unencrypted traffic is never leaving the system, especially in a company like a bank, a financial institution. You don't want to have any unencrypted traffic outside your packet broker. By using the application, the inspection application, as well as the TLS engine on the packet broker, we could assure that that traffic was never leaving the packet broker without being encrypted. So a closed box solution where encrypted traffic goes in, encrypted traffic goes out, but with full inspection of that traffic. So a highly integrated SSL decryption and pre-inspection engine running on the packet broker. What I quite often get is a question, how can we demonstrate these applications or these deployments for a possible customer? Is it possible to do a decryption in a lab environment? How can we set that up? So what I did is for this presentation, I created 3 different deployments or lab deployments which I want to explain. So first, there is the passive out-of-band decryption setup. So you'll probably recognize on the left side the drawing of the clients on one side, the server on the other side, having a passive tab in the middle, which sends the traffic to the SSL engine, and the decrypted traffic is going to an inspection tool. In this case, I just used Wireshark to show the traffic that it is really decrypted. In this case, I used an N2 series, and the N2 series in my lab environment has 3 packetrons for which I use for all different kind of demonstration purposes. So you will see 2 SSL engines running, one for passive decryption, one for active inline decryption, and another packetron running virtual systems or VMware to run virtual systems and to demonstrate these closely integrated applications as well. On the left, you see a bypass module, you see an 8-port copper SFP module or an 8-port SFP module and an 8-port copper module. Clients are connected through a router to the packet broker on, as you see, port 45. Let me see if I can have my pointer here. Let me see if I can share it. No, it does not show my pointer. But on port 45, there's my client connected. I have port 46, there's my server connected, and my server actually is just a virtual machine. It's running VMware. On that VMware, I run an Ubuntu Linux version with 2 to web servers, and Let's Encrypt as the provider for the SSL certificates, so TLS certificates. I connect a passive tab in this link to show that the connection between the client and the server is actually connected. So that's the traffic that goes out of TRC1 Wireshark traffic capture 1, and inside we send the traffic to the TLS engine. The TLS engine does its decryption and send the traffic out on port 27 and show that traffic on TRC4. So if we look at the configuration of the packet broker, that's only 4 lines, and I put it here. So my client to server traffic, port 45, is going to port 46, 45 to port 46, and server to client connection is going from port 46 to port 45. In order to send that traffic to the packet broker engine, what I used is just a loopback port. So I sent a copy of to port 21. It's just I use just a packet broker port. In future implementations, we can use an internal port as well. That's something that will become available in the next software release, where we don't have to use an actual physical port as a loopback. We can use internal ports for loopback, so freeing up external physical ports. Sending that traffic to that loopback port enables us to use it as an input for the decryption engine. So that's on the next line. We take the traffic from the loopback port, send it to the packet broker engine or to the decryption engine. The decryption engine tries to decrypt the traffic based on the certificates that are installed in the packetron, and send the traffic out to port 27. And that is, if you take the packet broker itself or the packetron profile itself, you can take and do a decryption of the traffic, but forward the unencrypted traffic or the traffic that cannot be encrypted to an extra port. So I sent the traffic that cannot be encrypted and the copy of the encrypted traffic to port 27. So you can see that traffic is going into the packet broker, and that it's real encrypted traffic. The packetron itself creates a kind of virtual port, and we call it a virtual port, and that can be sent out, which is carrying the decrypted traffic, and send it out to port 21. So port 21 TRC2 shows the decrypted traffic, and port 27 shows the encrypted traffic that was going to the packetron. So an out-of-band decryption, where the client is talking to the server, server is talking to the client. We take a copy of the traffic, send that through the SSL engine sends the traffic on port 21 to an inspection tool. So passive out of band, only applicable for the the static keys, the non-ephemeral keys for deployment. For the man in the middle connection, so where we can decrypt ephemeral keys as well, you see the deployment is nearly the same, but now we have the SSL engine sitting in line with the communication. So we have the client is talking to the SSL engine tries to decrypt this traffic, tries to impersonate the server. So the client is thinking it's talking to the server, but actually it's talking to the SSL engine, running the certificate, using the certificates from the server to impersonate this server, decrypt that session with the client, and send it to a reporting tool. The copy is sent to the reporting tool, but actually the traffic is immediately sent to the other part of the encryption engine traffic is encrypted again, and a session is set up with the server, and actually there's a negotiation phase between the packetron and the packet broker and the server to establish the actual connection. So end to end there is a connection from the client to the server, but with the encryption engine in line with the traffic. A copy is sent to the inspection tool for reporting purposes or out-of-band inspection. Similar setup, client connecting to the packet broker is connected to the server with a tab just to show that we are actually using encrypted traffic here. The traffic is sent to the packetron. Packetron is decrypting the traffic and is sending that traffic to an inspection tool, in this case, yet again, a Wireshark. So how does that look like in the configuration? Yet still five lines. The client server connection. So I take the traffic from the client. It's on port 43. It's sent to the packetron profile. So we are in line. Packetron profile sent the traffic out again on port 44. So that's the client. So we do have a decryption engine in line with the traffic. What I usually do is I only send the traffic that I want to decrypt to the engine. So in this case, I only send HTTPS to the engine, and anything else I'm not sending that to the decryption engine. If the decryption engine receives traffic that it cannot decrypt, it just forwards this traffic, which can be anything, and just forward that traffic to the egress port. But obviously it uses some processing cycles, as well as it uses some bandwidth from the packetron. So what I usually do is I do not send that traffic to the packetron at all, but I just immediately forward the non-matching traffic to the egress port. Similar for the server to client traffic. So HTTPS, the return traffic is sent to the packetron for encryption and decryption and forwarded to the client. And the non-matched traffic, so anything that was not HTTPS, is immediately sent to the output ports and forward that to the client. The packetron itself, since we do have two different configurations or packetron profiles, one for encryption, one for decryption. Actually, it's the same profile, but it's two different deployments, one from client to server, one from server to client. What we do is we create two tab information flows as well, one from client to server and one from server to client. So I took both sessions, both outputs from the packetron profiles, and send it out to port 21. So port 21 carries the traffic from the client to the server, decrypted, and the other one is using the decrypted traffic from the server to the client. How does that look like? I have just a web page, and if I open that web page, it shows just a static page in this case, because it's easy to show, just some plain text. And if you look at the capture, you will see that it's TLS 1.3, as you see here, and it is unreadable, it's encrypted. The output on traffic capture 2, which is the encrypted version, you'll see the IP addresses are the same, 3.33 and 1.11. Here it's mentioned as TLS 1.3, but here it says, okay, it's not encrypted anymore, it's just a TCP connection. And you'll see that here we have the clear text. The part that's highlighted here is decrypted in this part. So you'll see the decryption engine is doing what it's supposed to do taking the encrypted traffic and send out a decrypted copy of the traffic on another port for inspection. So this is basically how it works, and this is how I usually explain and show how it's done in a live session. The active inline is a little bit more elaborate because, well, there is another inline appliance in this case that is connected. So we still have the client and the server again, still the same server, same deployment, but instead of creating a copy of the traffic, we send the decrypted traffic through a firewall. In this case, I use pfSense as a firewall, send the traffic out on one port, going through the firewall, and send back to the packet broker where the traffic is re-encrypted and sent to the client or the server, depending on which way the traffic was flowing. On both sides, I again use a Wireshark to show the traffic. So the encrypted traffic, the decrypted traffic flowing through the firewall, and just a copy of the decrypted traffic. That's a nice feature of the Packetron as well. Even though we do have an inline deployment, the packet broker provides you with a copy of the decrypted traffic as well, which you can feed to out-of-band deployments. So even though you have an inline deployment, you can take a copy of the decrypted traffic and have a copy of the decrypted traffic and send it to out-of-band tools as well. Again, how does it work? My client, my server, still the SSL engine as a man in the middle, sits between the client and the server, but now the traffic is sent through the security appliance. Again, I prefer to only send the traffic that needs to be decrypted to the packet broker or to the Packetron. So what I'll do in a client-server connection, I will first look at a match of the traffic. If there is a match, then we decrypt the traffic and send it to the inline inspection tool. If there is no match, we still probably want to inspect the traffic. Maybe this is HTTPS, but this is web application firewall, and there may be HTTP as well, or FTP, or whatever protocol. So that still needs to be inspected. So it's not sent to the decryption engine. Decryption engine would only forward that traffic, but it takes some performance. So I prefer to send it immediately to the inspection application. When the traffic comes out, we don't know whether this was encrypted traffic or just traffic forwarded from the input port immediately. So what the encryption engine is doing is it adds a label to the traffic. So all encrypted traffic or decrypted traffic gets a label. So once the traffic comes out of your inline inspection appliance, we look at the label. Does it have a label? Okay, then we have to re-encrypt the traffic and send it to the client or to the customer, depending on the flow. And if it doesn't have a label, then we don't have to send it through to the encryption engine, and we can forward that traffic immediately to the egress port. For server to client, it's exactly the same. We just look at other ports, whether it's the source port or destination port of the traffic. If we look at the packet broker configuration, it is pretty similar to the previous configurations as well. It's a little bit longer because we have some more traffic to, some more rules to follow, but it starts again with taking the traffic, the client traffic, send it to the Packetron, and after the Packetron has processed it, it's going to the egress port. If we do have a non-match, then send it to your inline appliance immediately. If it did have a match, we have decrypted traffic going out of a virtual port, so that's a port inside the packet broker, and we can just forward it to that inline appliance, which was connected to port 22. If it comes out, it goes to, comes in on the packet broker on port 28 again in my turn. So port 28 is used as an input port, send it back to my packetron, which uses that virtual port again. And if it's decrypted, it goes out to port 42. Server to client is working exactly the same. And as I mentioned, the packet broker is able to create a copy of that decrypted traffic for other purposes as well. So what I did is I added another line taking the decrypted traffic from both client to server and server to client sessions, and use that copy and send it out to another port for inspection tools, or in this case, just to show that we do have that decrypted traffic on that port as well. So 3 deployment methods, and all 3 can be used as for decrypting the traffic, either a full passive out-of-band deployment, an active out-of-band deployment, or an active inline deployment. In my case, as I mentioned before, I use an N2 series, the modular platform to do the demonstrations. Shortly we introduced 2 new platforms, the 4248-6C and the Niagara 4540, 2 fixed appliances that have the ability to accommodate 2 packetrons on the rear of the system. So with the fixed appliances, we can now offer decryption functionality as well. And that makes it much more feasible to do deployments in environments where a modular system would be too expensive or just too much. So we can do it in smaller deployments as well. So what I created is just to show you. I need to do that one first. And this one was something that I forgot to mention, is that we do support all SSL 3.0 and TLS versions. We can decrypt and encrypt SSL sessions on non-standard ports. In the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that the SSL layer or TLS layer is actually a layer that sits in between the transport layer and the application layer. That means that it can be deployed for any application. And so if you look at the standard deployment, we can just look at whatever TCP port is used, and we recognize that application. We recognize we don't need to have the port. We don't need the port to recognize the specific application. So we know HTTPS is usually run on port 443, but we do not have to have that on port 443 to recognize that it's HTTPS. We can do that on other ports as well. So expensive protocol support, so we can do HTTPS, but basically all the encrypted protocols, so SMTP, email, SMTPS, IMAP, SIP, well, you name them, and we do support them as well. Similar to DNS over TLS, or have TLS started from the session. Some implementations use TLS only after the session has started. Let's say SMTP, for instance, can start as a non-encrypted session where the client says, okay, now we have established a connection, but before I exchange the real client information, I want to switch from a non-encrypted session to an encrypted session. That's called start TLS. That's something we do support as well as the implicit TLS, where we start with an encrypted connection and everything within that protocol is encrypted. Some TLS enhancements like session resumption, speedy protocol, OCSP stapling, where you can check the validity of the certificate, and that's the validity check is used in the negotiation session as well, so that's used by OCSP stapling. And we do have quite extensive support for desktop and mobile browsers. So as I mentioned before, in a man-in-the-middle deployment, we act and we mimic the client when talking to a server. Well, there are many different HTTPS clients. So, for instance, well, you have Safari from Apple, you have all the different browsers, and all these browsers do use a little bit a different implementation of HTTP. And often the server is looking at these implementations, these dialects, and answers and recognizes them and answers in the correct dialect again. So in order to be a real man in the middle, you have to use these dialects as well. So we implemented these different browsers or these different browser dialects and use these dialects as well when talking to the server. So the server responds with the correct dialect to be used at the actual client. Now, to come back to the hardware deployment itself, as I mentioned, I used the N2 platform, and just to show you what is required to do an SSL implementation on the packet broker, the smallest deployment in this case for the mobile browser, the N2 series, would be an 8-port module, a Packetron, and obviously the chassis. So if we look at a passive out-of-band deployment, we do use the chassis 2845, that's the smallest one, an 8-port packet broker module, a Packetron, a couple of SFPs, and a decryption engine or the decryption license. And for the passive out-of-band, we use the passive deployment engine, decryption engine. For the active out-of-band, the hardware is exactly the same. Still that chassis, an 8-port packet broker module, a Packetron, 3 SFPs, and only the license has changed from a passive license to an in-band license. But basically that's it. On the active inline deployment, the only thing that changes here is that we add another SFP to it, because instead of one connection to your reporting tool or inspection tool, we use 2 connections, one going in, one going out, because we have an inline deployment. So we add another SFP to it, and we run the man-in-the-middle deployment of the Packetron. So we change the license again. If you deploy the man-in-the-middle license, you automatically get the inline deployment license and the passive deployment as well. If you use the in-band license or the active out-of-band, then you will also get the passive out-of-band deployment. If you want to afterwards deploy the man-in-the-middle, you have to upgrade your decryption engine license. As I mentioned, we did introduce 2 new platforms, the fixed platforms 4248 6C and the 4540, 2 fixed platforms that can have 2 Packetrons in the system. For deployments, equipment based on 6C is 1 times the 4248 6C or a 4540 with 1 fixed Packetron and a license, Packetron license. For the active deployment, exactly the same. You'll see that the hardware deployments for all implementations is the same. The only thing that will change is the license that you run on the packet broker, on the Packetron, to do the correct implementation of the of the deployment. So the man in the middle, the active inline or the passive inline. And with these three deployments, I have come to the end of my presentation. So if you have any questions, please ask.
Thank you, Andrea. So from the participant, do you have any question? If not, I have a question for Andrea. Okay, let's see, there's a question. If the packetron doesn't have either the private key of the server or the client, how the packetron decrypt the traffic?
If the packetron does not have any certificate installed, then it is not able to decrypt the traffic. It will recognize that it is encrypted traffic, but it will just forward that traffic unencrypted to the server. So in order to decrypt the traffic, we have to have that certificate installed on the packet broker. The packet broker has its embedded certificate store, which is a write-only store. So once you take that certificate and you upload it to the packetron, once it is uploaded, you cannot touch it anymore. The only thing you can do is delete it or update it with the new version of that certificate, but you cannot download it anymore. But in order to decrypt the traffic, the packetron has to have that certificate.
By the way, can the anonymous attendee identify yourself? Who asked that question? Hello. Okay, never mind. Jason, you asked a question. The page 11 solution is inline decryption and send the third application layer 7 defense. How many packetron do you use? Can one packetron install SSL and third-party application?
In this case, we use two packetrons. As I mentioned before, SSL decryption currently is an exclusive application for the packetron, meaning that once you do SSL decryption on the packetron, that's the only function that packetron can be used for. So in this case, we use two packetrons, one running a virtual system. So that's running a VMware implementation where you can run one or multiple virtual machines on the packetron, and one packetron for doing the decryption. So traffic is coming in to the packet broker, is sent to the packetron for decryption. The output of the decryption is forwarded to the second packetron running the layer 7 defense application. And the L7 defense application returns the traffic to the encryption packetron, and then that traffic is re-encrypted again and sent to the actual server. So two packetron deployment in this case in an N2 series.
So to summarize, usually we run the SSL on a specific packetron. We don't mix with third application, right? Correct?
Currently not. I am looking into having the packetron or the decryption functionality also be completely modular, meaning that we can run SSL decryption with any other packetron functionality as well. That could be decryption, but it could also be packet slicing, deduplication, etc., etc. So but that will be a future deployment. Current deployment has, for the current deployment, SSL decryption is a dedicated function of the packetron.
Right, thank you. So Jason, you have another question. You want to know the SSL profile configuration step. So that will probably, we can organize another session, because I believe that probably takes more time. And maybe one last question for Andrea. So in terms of the market positioning, right? So our partner should go after what kind of customer, expecting what kind of throughput from our system. As you mentioned, there are many SSL decryption solution in the marketplace. So where exactly do we position? How do they go and hunt for the right target?
A very good question. So if we look at our sweet spot, then we are focusing on, I would say, the slow protocol deployments. So hence the reason that we were very successful in the deployment with the session border controller, for instance. So that usually many sessions, but the bandwidth itself is relatively low. The current Packetron can do roughly 4 gigabit per second on man in the middle, 8 gigabit per second on out-of-band decryption. We are working on stronger Packetrons to increase the performance on these applications. But our sweet spot currently is on the slower protocols or the links that do not use a huge bandwidth. If you have multiple 10 gigs of traffic that you need to have encrypted, then the Packetron is not the most suitable deployment for that. If you look at protecting a single server, if you're looking at protecting specific deployments like here the session border controller, where we can have a lot of sessions, but the actual traffic that is decrypted per session is relatively low. Similar in the deployment with the API inspection. This is not high volume bandwidth. This is in bandwidth that is very, very important, and where we have where the customer really needs to be sure that there's no attack going on in this session. So relatively low bandwidth, but high security. This is where where our current sweet spot is, and that may change in future with stronger Packetrons, but this is where we currently focus.
Thank you, Andrea. So due to time overrun, I just accommodate one last question from Brian Huang. Does Packetron support SSL offload only or also support SSL interception?
Well, as I mentioned before, in our deployments, we do support both the offload as well as the SSL interception. So there's not that much different actually. If you look at SSL offload, then it means that you decrypt the traffic and send that decrypted traffic to multiple inspection in appliances or report the appliances. So not each and every appliance does to have its own decryption in order to inspect the traffic. So it's a decrypt once, inspect many. That's usually an offload deployment. And with man in the middle, it's very easy. So either take the active out of band, where we decrypt the traffic and send it to multiple appliances. Here it's one appliance, but we can send it to multiple appliances. That's typically an offload deployment. But also for the active inline, where now I only drew one appliance, so the traffic is going through one appliance, but it could be a series of appliances where we use surface chaining. So the traffic is going from one appliance to another appliance, maybe to a third appliance, and the traffic that comes out or is returned by the third appliance is going back to the packet broker and is re-encrypted. That's a typical deployment. So that is offload. Well, what's the difference with SSL interception? Is actually the same. SSL interception is nothing more than a man in the middle deployment, where we Again, active out-of-band and active inline is a typical deployment of SSL interception. We are in between the session to be able to decrypt that session. So there is not that much difference between the two. In passive, we can decrypt and send it to multiple appliances. So that should be, you can use that as SSL offload as well. So there is not that much different, but yes, we do support all varieties on deployment.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea. So we come to the end of the session. So again, thanks for your participation and your questions. So we'll be preparing the recorded video and we'll be sending out to the participants within 1 week. Yeah. So once again, thanks to Andrea and Zeph for organizing this for the APAC partners. Thank you very much and see you guys next time.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.